welcome to Becoming a More Robust Human. My name is Rick Alexander. If you guys haven't followed along with the work that I've done, I'll give you a brief history. So I spent a number of years in the military in a special operations capacity, also an ultra-endurance athlete. I've completed a number of 200-mile runs, including a 240-mile run in body armor, which I'm only telling you because it will become a little bit relevant here in the work. And the work that I do now is really, I work as a writer and as a speaker, and I try to help people develop the tools and tactics so that they can make themselves more resilient humans. I think it's in the world today, we've created a lot of safe spaces, and we try to make the world adaptable to the human, and I think that's a flawed plan. And the reason I think that is flawed is because there's always stuff that's going wrong in our world. We live in this world of constant change where disaster is always right around the corner. So I think it's a much more useful to learn the mental tools and tactics and learn how to conceptualize your life so that you can continue to move through it with ease regardless of what the environment is doing. And really that comes down to breath work. I think it all begins with breath. That's why I started my first quote up here is remember to breathe. It is, after all, the secret to life. Right now, of course, in this pandemic, we're in a time where people are losing breath at a very rapid pace, right? And so, the best time to plant a tree was yesterday, but the second best time is right now. And so, I know that this breath work has become popular over the last few years. Maybe you've seen it, maybe you've engaged in a little bit of it. I'm not going to overcomplicate it here because I want it to be something that you can actually do and add into your life right now to start making a difference. But if you haven't yet, the reason I said that quote is because now is a good time to start. You can always start to make yourself a more robust human being. You can always teach yourself to learn to be more resilient. And that's true even when you find yourself in the midst of chaos and you've done nothing to prepare, right? The questions you ask yourself, the way that you conduct yourself, the character that you're building, it all matters. We tend to want to skip over things and pick and choose what we think matters. It's like, well, why would I sit down and do 5 minutes of breath work? Doesn't really matter. It's like, actually matters a lot. It all matters, right? And people that are having their breath work compromised right now certainly wish that they could go back and get more training. So if you didn't start planting the tree a while ago, now's a great time to start. I know with myself, I watched it trend, the breath work and Wim Hof and all of that, and I wasn't super compelled to do it. There was something about it that seemed trendy to me. And as I've gotten, a relatively consistent breath work practice, I'm realizing a lot of the other work that I do, like the mental work and the endurance work, it's got to be built on a foundation that's solid. So if you can take the time to shore up your foundation, right, which is your breath, it is imperative beyond all imperative things that you be able to control your breathing. And if you can do that, everything else will go from there. So I'm going to talk basic physiology today, give you some tools and tactics, some tricks, some daily practices to make yourself better, and then also including some resources to some other accounts like The Art of Breath and some coaches on Instagram with a PDF that you can check out. And if you want to dive into that work and really nerd out on the physiology of it and take the seminars and stuff that I'm gonna link to. Okay, so step one is to notice your breath. So, it's interesting. We tend to get so caught up in our lives. We get so caught up in our emotions that we don't have a lot of space from them. And unfortunately, if you're caught up in your emotions, you're kind of always doing what they say, right? It's like same thing with fear. It's like if people don't realize that you can acknowledge your fear and not have it control you don't have to have it control like the way that your life turns out. You don't have to let it make you mindless. You can acknowledge it. You can be as scared as you want and still decide not to do anything based on that fear, right? It's an informational input, but the only way that we can treat the environment around us as an informational input is if we can begin to gain some objectivity from our emotions, from our feelings, from the environment, from all these things. And in that way, we are the leadership of our own being, right? We are the leaders. Well, and what leaders do is they look around and they assess all of the inputs and then they make the best decision going forward. A lot of us aren't able to do that because we're so corralled by fear and we're so corralled by our environment. And so the first part of all meditation practices, it's always to learn to become the observer of your own life. And so it's just to witness. It's to witness your thoughts. It's to witness your breath. Witnessing your breath is really the beginning of all of that. If you notice your breath, then you can notice where you are. Okay, you can notice how you are showing up in that moment, because your breath tells you a lot about the kind of state that you're in. So up here I have states follow traits. So you could think about this in a number of ways, right? If you are really unhappy, but you begin to smile, it will trigger a mechanism in your mind that begins to release serotonin and does begin to make you happier. If you are feeling a lot of shame and a lot of guilt, you'll see that people like that tend to carry, and they tend to be rounded over. And that's why if you begin to sit up and open your chest, put your shoulders back and your chest up, even if you don't have an inherent, like something inherently to be prideful about, what you'll notice is it's beginning to change your physiological state. So when I say states follow traits, if you're scared and you're being put into a survival state, you can take the keys back to your own life by utilizing traits that then change your state. So hopefully that's making sense for you. So I'm going to get into what I mean by survival and thrive here, but just understand that the first thing we do is we notice our breath. That tells us, how are we showing up in this moment? What's our body reacting to? Sometimes we have like subconscious fears that we don't even notice. And so if you begin to tap in and you start to notice your breath, you'll notice it's short and shallow in that you're responding to some sort of fear or some sort of sympathetic sympathetic input. And so being able to pull yourself outside of that, again, gain objectivity, and then direct your behavior so that you can show up in the way that you actually want to show up in that moment. That's hugely beneficial. Most people are just at the behest of their environment. They don't have much power over how they show up. The way we begin to take that back is we begin to notice what's going on with us. And so if you just close your eyes for a minute, you can do this with me, and I'm going to walk you through a couple breath things. So I know that might be weird if you've never done anything like this, but I promise if you just stick with it, you'll notice a tangible difference. And that's where I think this stuff matters. It's very tangible. So if you just close your eyes for a minute and just notice how you're breathing. Because you'll notice when people tell you, hey, you should take a deep breath, right? It's because you're not, right? When you start to react to fear, you become sympathetic. People are like, take a breath, relax. It's like what they're saying is, notice how you're showing up, right? And that's why that matters. So I want to divide our nervous system into two different states. We have the sympathetic state and we have the parasympathetic state. So I'm going to breeze over this stuff. I'm going to make it pretty simplified. It's definitely far more complex than I'm explaining it, but for the purposes of this, it's perfect, okay? So I want you to think of sympathetic, and I want you to associate that with survival. The reason being is because the oldest part of our minds, right, or the oldest part of our brain, is the lizard brain, right? It operates off survival. It is the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism. So it's a very quick reaction, and it basically makes a decision. Should I stay? Should I go? Should I fight? Do I just sit here and freeze? Okay? And freeze is actually the most common one. So most people think, oh, it's fight or flight. It's actually freeze for most people. In the military, we would do a lot of work on training ourselves to come back to our breath so that when we would freeze, we would be able to learn how to work through that moment. Because, of course, when you get shot at or something really traumatic happens, it is your natural inclination to just freeze, right? You can see there's tons of studies with mice where they just shine a light on them. They just don't know what's happening, so they stop. Now, the incredible part about being a human in 2020 is that we have the prefrontal cortex. We have new parts of our mind that have evolved, and those parts of our mind give us choice. So it's no longer fight, flight, or freeze. Maybe there's other options, right? And that's what the prefrontal cortex gives us, okay? So this is associated with survival because it is your biological mechanism that is meant to help you survive. You don't get a choice in when it kicks on, and you don't want a choice, right? Because everybody here's a good way to put it, right? So the people that were walking through the woods and saw a tree branch and it looked like a snake, the people that would assume it was a snake survived and they passed on their genes. This is the reason for this, right? And so this is very simplified, but the people that just assumed it was a tree branch, the one time it turned out to be a snake, didn't pass on their genes. So you can imagine that's replicating itself across a various number of scenarios throughout all of life. And so there's all these things that you don't want necessarily to have a lag time to when your sympathetic nervous system kicks on. You're walking across a street and a car you didn't see comes, you want to react before you have any time to think about it. And that's why we have the sympathetic nervous system. It's all about survival. But if you want to thrive in life, you can't act from a place of survival, right? Because offense and defense are different strategies altogether. And so if you want to think about your life in terms of making decisions that are going to serve you in the long term, you want to be able to make yourself parasympathetic, because that is a state where you can actually make a logical decision from. You can actually weigh consequences. You can think from that place. Your behavior is not being corralled by your environment when you're parasympathetic. So the sympathetic nervous system, it was built within us. We evolved this nervous system just like all the other animals did so that we could survive. It wasn't meant to, the fight, flight, or freeze wasn't meant to like fight our bosses and flee our office and all of the things that we have that it kicks on for right now. The problem is we are in a state as modern humans of constant stress. So a lot of people are living with their nervous system constantly ticked on, right? And unfortunately, what happens when that happens, it uses biological resources at a really fast rate. That's why people say that stress causes heart disease and all these other unfortunate health benefits, or not benefits, but health effects, right? Because when you're sympathetic, your body just was only meant to be in that for a short period of time and then get somewhere else where it can deregulate and calm down. Same thing with when it comes to working out, right? So when you think about when you're working out, you don't actually get better. You don't get fitter until you're in the recovery process, right? You don't get fitter in the gym. You get fitter when you're sleeping and eating. So but unfortunately, a lot of people will work out and then they go to their stressful life. And so recovery is often dampened, and where our bodies are producing cortisol, the stress hormone, at really rapid rates. And the reason being is we never learn to switch to that parasympathetic state. And so after we notice our breath, we notice how we're being, it's time to switch to a state of survival so that we can make decisions that benefit us in the long term. Remember, we don't want to live this place. So a couple characteristics of the sympathetic nervous system. Breathing is short, shallow, it's rapid, your heart rate is increased. Now parasympathetic, it's deep, long breath. Your heart rate is slow, right? You're recovering. That's the rest and digest, right? So right now during this pandemic, it's constant fear. It's coming through the media. It's coming through our phones. It's coming from all these places. And we've got to learn to not expose ourselves to that, because one of the things that I'm finding right now, just talking to clients and all these people, is there are certain things that are really suffering right now. Like people's sex drive is really suffering, right? Because you can't, when you're in a survival state, you're not thinking about procreating. You're not thinking about having sex. You're not thinking about pleasure. You're literally surviving. Remember, surviving and thriving are very different. So the kind of breath work that's actually going to switch your state, scientifically proven, is a exhale that is double the length of the inhale. So I want to do that with you right now. I do that a lot in the classes I teach, and I do that a lot when I give a talk, because what happens is when we're sympathetic, we're reflective. We can't absorb new information. We can't learn anything new in that state. It's not the state that you want to spend any amount of time in. It's meant to help you survive, to get you somewhere. You're going to be pretty sympathetic when you're working out, especially if you're working out hard. But then you want to become parasympathetic. You want to stop using resources so fast so that your body can aid in recovery, and then immune system will increase. So another thing that is happening during this pandemic is immune systems are compromised, which of course is scaring people even more, because even if they don't have the COVID-19 virus, they're still getting sick, and allergies and common cold and the flu and all that. So we want to increase our immune system, but that can only happen when we're parasympathetic. So the best thing to do, 5 to 6 breaths, right? Exhale, double the length of the inhale. So what we're going to do right now is I'm going to just do 3 with you so we can get on with the lecture. So now have you close your eyes right now, and I'm going to count you in for 1, 2, 3 through the nose, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Exhale through the mouth. So we go in through the nose and out through the mouth, okay? Now what that does is it helps our breathing mechanics, right? Most of us, as I'll get into, are mouth breathers, so we're all the time, right? And so the actual efficiency of our breathing has been severely diminished because of that. And so you notice if you breathe through the nose and you take a deep breath, you actually forces you into a correct position, right? And so if you're a smoker, it's actually even worse. You've actually really patterned bad breath mechanics, because if you're smoking, you're pulling from the top of your lungs and you're pulling this way, right? So you're actually ruining your mechanics, and then you pattern that over long periods of time, and you actually just learn, you not only do you, of course, diminish your lungs, but you actually just need to you need to counteract that with something else that's actually going to open up your chest cavity, open up your lungs, learn how to put you in that thrive state, okay? So right now we're going to do 3 breaths. Close your eyes. It'll just help you sort of notice the breath, because you'll have less stimulus, less inputs. And we'll go in through the nose and out through the mouth. We'll go in for 3. 1, 2, 3. Out for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In for 2, 3. Out for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In for 2, 3. Out for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And now open your eyes. So typically what happens after that final out exhale, you open the eyes, the room feels different, especially if you do 5 to 6 breath cycles like that. And so this is something I'll tell you when we talk about go-to exercises. This is as needed. And a lot of us that haven't learned to exist in a thrive state for long periods of time, we have to come back to this multiple times a day. Like I said, I do it with all my clients before we start coaching, before I give a talk or content or anything. And the reason being is because it allows you to actually be able to receive and learn new information. We're deflective all the time. We're in constant survival mode. We're constantly hearing fear inputs, and we don't know how to process it. We're hearing all this different stuff, especially right now. It's running rampant, and that's why, all these other things that are associated with thriving, like sex drive and stuff, are being diminished. They're being diminished. So we want to create a state that we can thrive in. So if you're going to journal, if you're going to watch a lecture, if you're going to do anything as far as personal development goes, I would suggest that you use this breath work in order to create that thrive state first and then go into it. That way you're not battling through a sympathetic nervous system in order to learn new things, right? Because it'll make it very hard. You have it's a competing state right there. So do yourself the favor, use that as needed. Okay. Something else that I already alluded to, but it's nasal versus mouth breathing. It's all about efficiency, right? If you watch like out in the world, just random people, we're a society of mouth breathers, which is fine as long as nothing is wrong and we don't need to maximize efficiency with breath. I did a 205-mile race in the mountains in Lake Tahoe a couple years ago, and I trained for that at sea level. And so when I went to race, I actually had to battle the altitude sickness as well. And 80 miles into it, I developed a condition that's pretty common if you go up to high altitude, called high altitude pulmonary edema. A lot of people get pulled out of this race specifically for that. I think 5 people got pulled out in the year that I did. But I had spent so much time in my training cycle increasing my breathing efficiency and working out with nasal breathing only, that when that happened and I was like spitting up blood and it was a super dangerous situation, not that I would recommend this by any means, but I had spent so much money on that race, I had spent so much time prepping, and I was really committed to finishing. I switched to nasal breathing. I ran the last 130 miles, 120 something miles, nasal breathing only. And because I had spent so much time prepping it, I had changed my efficiency and breath, and was able to finish a race that a lot of people were pulled out of the race for. So something that I would highly recommend is that, you might not find yourself racing at altitude, but being able to improve your breathing mechanics, again, because then if you do get something like what's happening right now in this with the COVID, is it's not the actual disease that's killing people, right? It's not the actual illness. What's happening is your body is creating an inflammatory response to fight the illness. And that inflammatory response is bringing all these fluids. That fluid is getting lodged in the lungs, and the lungs aren't able to expand and contract like normal. And so if you learn to increase your breathing efficiency prior to that happening, then when the system gets stressed, like it did in Tahoe for me when my lungs filled up with fluid, or like it might happen to any of us if we get this illness, we've done all that we can to prepare ourselves to be able to deal with a situation like that, right? And so that's kind of the rub for all of this. It's like it matters. Yes, it matters because personal development matters and mental health matters. It also matters because if you learn to survive, if you learn to thrive, then surviving becomes a lot easier. But a lot of us are at that baseline level of surviving all the time. And so then when we get a new stress introduced to our system doesn't know how to handle it. And so if you do begin to become a nasal breather, you will notice it does change your breathing mechanics, and you'll become more efficient as a breather. Another thing that's happening is some of the work that I'm going to talk about, like the Wim Hof cycles here, it's increasing CO2 tolerance, right? You can think about CO2, right? Breathe oxygen in, but then what comes out is CO2. We all know that, right? So CO2 is like your body's exhaust system. And if we're mouth breathers and we breathe inefficiently, we're constantly off-gassing. We have to, right? We have to constantly get rid of all this off-gas because our body hasn't learned to efficiently process the oxygen that it gets. And so we're breathing quicker. So what's happening right now, and what's going to continue to happen, is that all over the world, masks are becoming mandatory. But of course, for a mask to be effective, it's got to be over your mouth and your nose. Now, when a mask is over your mouth and your nose, it's increasing the CO2 that's getting built up in here. So now every breath, you're not taking in pure oxygen anymore. Okay, so the reason that CO2 tolerance matters is because you want to be able to operate with more CO2. A lot of times, right now, nurses and doctors are like after a couple hours of working, they're getting super lightheaded. Same thing with people that are out running and biking and stuff that are trying to wear a mask. And it's like aggravating the hell out of them. It's giving them a headache and stuff. So what we can do is we can learn to increase our CO2 tolerance. And on that PDF, I actually link to a test to be able to test your CO2 tolerance with the Art of Breath. Now, if you're interested in learning more about this stuff, I'd push you to check out the online resources with Art of Breath as well that I've linked up and all this stuff. And they have a ton of YouTube videos. You can follow them on Instagram, all that. But all that to say, we want to increase our CO2 tolerance so that we can, again, remember, if we learn to thrive, if we increase our efficiency, if we increase our resilience, then all of these things that we add to our lives that are kind of stressors, we're able to take in stride and just continue on with our life without having it affect our life too much, right? Because we don't want to not be able to do the things, we don't want to be able to not do our job or our hobbies or anything like that. So, go-to exercises to increase all of this stuff. So, of course, the parasympathetic breath work with the exhale, double the amount of the inhale for 5 or 6 cycles. That's as needed. I would do it whenever you want to learn something new. Definitely if you're going to do meditation. Anytime you need to anytime you notice you're sympathetic and that's going on too long, bring yourself back to a parasympathetic state. Same thing if you're having trouble sleeping at night. A lot of times what happens, especially with different stress disorders, is that your nervous system is just kicked on without you actually being exposed to anything. That's one of the things that happens with PTSD, which is why I know about it. So your nervous system gets kicked on. You have to be able to combat that, right? And so if you're laying awake at night and you can't sleep, sometimes you'll notice your heart rate's a little bit high for no reason. If that's the case, learn to do these parasympathetic breaths, and then it will help lower your state, change your state, hopefully, and then hopefully you can get some more sleep. Okay, so nasal breath training, I like to put it in for me and for my clients 2 to 3 times a week, especially for my endurance clients. So I linked up a bunch of exercises. This could be, I would start with maybe just like a 40-minute walk, nasal breathing only. Now, quick trick, you can bring a water bottle, and whenever you're feeling the urge to breathe, because that'll be the weird part, it's just keeping your mouth shut when you're not used to it, you can just take a drink of water without breathing in, and that will help a lot. Another one that I really like, if you have access to a treadmill, which I know some of us don't right now, but probably will soon, put it at 15% incline, 3-mile-an-hour walk, do 30 minutes, nasal breathing only, don't allow yourself to touch the sides. Now, as the workouts increase, as the intensity increases, one of the things I really enjoy about nasal breathing is the mental toughness aspect of it. Like, it's just really difficult, especially when you're not used to it. The first time I did that workout that on the treadmill, I was like starting to feel lightheaded, and so I really had to like force myself to stay focused and push. And of course, if you hit a certain point, you can just always open your mouth and it's over, right? And so and then the next thing that I would recommend is doing like a 5K run or row, nasal breathing only. Just feel it out, right? What's going to happen is that your pace is going to be slowed down incredibly, because you're not going to be very efficient breathing that way. It's like breathing through a straw. At first, it's just difficult, but you can learn to get better and better at it. Another thing that you can do once you get a little bit more advanced is you can do sprint intervals, however you want, running, biking, rowing, whatever you're into. And then for the recovery, do nasal breathing only. That is really difficult as well. But all these things are just because it's going to force you into a correct position. It's going to increase your efficiency. CO2 tolerance is going to increase, and you'll just become a better, more efficient breather. There's a bunch of different variables into that. You can also reach out to me if you're interested in using nasal breathing for your specific sport. Again, like there's some science that's beginning to come out on it because people are becoming interested in it. But I would just say, anecdotally, it's changed my life in massive ways. It's also been massively beneficial for my clients. So, ton of benefit there and a ton of different exercises. Again, I put some of them on the PDF. Now, the last thing that I want to tell you is this Wim Hof breathing. So I don't know a ton about Wim Hof, so I'm not going to promote him. It's not the way that I've learned to do a lot of this breath work. Some people, love his work, and I don't know anyone that really complains about it. But the one thing I do use of Wim Hof that I would recommend is this. I linked it up on the YouTube. So basically, the way that this works is it's 30 deep breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth. Now, after breath 30, and the YouTube video is good because you can just follow the instructions. After the 30, you're going to blow all your oxygen out, and then you're going to do a 2-minute breath hold with no oxygen. Now, at first, that might sound hard. My partner, Danielle, was able to do 2 minutes first try. That's crazy. She's a rock star. It's taken me a long time to get to 2 minutes on no oxygen. But if at any point you have to breathe, you just take a deep breath, blow it out, and then just resume the hold. And you do that as many times as you have to. The thing to understand with breath work is there's nowhere to get. It's all you just getting better, learning more, becoming more efficient, learning to breathe better. And what you'll find out is that because breath work is so core to who we are as human, because we need the atmosphere exchanged in breath in order to continue to evolve and continue to exist, all of these practices, they're going to ripple out and affect your life in ways that you wouldn't even notice, they're just going to improve your well-being in massive ways. So not only do you create the witness, do you create the notice and the ability to, figure out your physiological state, but then you take the keys back, you learn how to change that state. And now you're in the driver's seat in your life, and you're not being controlled by your environment. And so that Wim Hof one, I like to do it every single day. Reason being, at first, it was kind of like I had to force it, but now it's just become a practice, and it's become an art form, and it's something I love. It creates a lot of stillness in your mind, especially during that breath hold. One of the things he talks about in the video is like a lot of times meditators will meditate, for years, and they won't be able to get as deep as you can get in meditation and into stillness during that. And this isn't on meditation, so I'm not going to go super far and down that rabbit hole, but just being able to create that stillness in your life, realize that you don't have to make decisions based on your environment. It gives you a lot more options in your life. It allows you to play offense. So you don't have to play continual defense. You don't have to rely on your biological mechanisms to get you out of things. You can sort of change your behavior as you want to, and you can weigh different options without feeling the pressure to always respond, because the quicker you react to something, the higher the chance of error, the quicker you screw up your life. So if you learn to use this breath work to be able to dial your states up and down, dial your nervous system up and down as you want to, then you find that the keys are in your hands when it comes to resilience, and not only that, but thriving going forward. So again, reach out to me if you have any questions about this. Something I'm super passionate about. I think it is the root of all this other work that you're going to do. We want to build a solid foundation so that anything we put on top of that can actually stay for any amount of time. So thanks for checking this out, and looking forward to seeing how this works in your life.